Let's rock and roll. Amen. You have been listening to The Financial Promise. Let's start that over, Jacob, because that intro was wrong. Okay. All right. Good afternoon. You are listening to The Financial Promise radio program, 30 Minutes of Power with Jason Fields. And today I have a special guest, a good friend, a mentor, prolific businessman who has a just incredible resume, a big wig in the town of Kenosha and Racine. And so he's like a rock star down there. But before I introduce to you all my dear friend, and I'll let you know who this is, we want to thank our sponsors, the Financial Promise Foundation. Many of you know I do financial and business literacy, where we teach financial and business literacy. And we're going to be offering some new classes so you all can begin to come on board, take some of the classes. And you're going to love some of the new classes that we're going to do. You can reach us there at www.thefinancialpromise.com to see our class offerings. And the Black Wealth Network, which is our investment platform, and that's open to anybody. It was named the Black Wealth Network because we have African American money managers more in one place than you've ever seen. And you can reach us there at www.bwnonline.com. Now, that said, I wanted to bring to you all today a special guest. And I said he was a friend, a mentor. I've known representative, former congressman, now Secretary of Transportation. We mess around. The great Peter Barca. Peter, thanks for coming to the show, man.
Well, Jason, terrific to be with you again, and I appreciate all the great work you do in the financial literacy arena, as well as representing the people of the greater Milwaukee area. In fact, one thing that just jumped out at me when you were saying this is, as you know, the governor mentioned putting together a task force on financial literacy. In fact, Kathy Blumenfeld, who's a Secretary of Financial Institutions, in her hearing that she had, that was one of the main things that came up in her confirmation hearing. So I know you've been a tremendous leader on this topic. You passed a very important bill in the legislature on this topic, and it just so happens that both that department, the governor, are really focused on it. So it's just such an opportune time to take advantage of the great work that you've done, and hopefully you can be a guiding spirit for this group.
Thank you, Peter. And as we get into it, I want the audience to sort of get a gist of who's in front of us. And I think when I say you're a mentor, a dear friend, I think a lot of people may underestimate the path and may not fully appreciate. You were a former congressman. You were in the Clinton administration, am I correct?
Yes, I was. Yeah, I very much enjoyed that. In fact, it sort of reminds me of that a little bit, being in the governor's cabinet now.
Yeah, now you're in the governor's
executive branch.
You're former leader of the Democratic arm of the caucus in Madison. What was it like in the Clinton administration? And then for our listening audience, we're going to talk about and discuss some Foxconn issues, and we really want to talk about Governor Evers had his first budget. And I got to say, Peter, when we sat there and we listened to his budget, it was like the greatest budget ever. I mean, it was something in it for everybody. I mean, if you were a person sitting on, if you were watching TV and you were listening to Governor Evers, you walk away going, wow, this budget has all the things that we ever really hoped for. And so before we get into that, a little bit about your background as in Congress and how it prepared you for doing this stuff now.
Well, it's interesting because a very dear friend that I knew going back to high school just put a nice post on my Facebook saying, well, we're all a product of our experiences, and maybe it's come together for you in a very positive way. And it certainly has. The Clinton administration, well, first of all, I was in the legislature years ago. I was in the employment and training arena. And so I ran for the legislature initially to work on economic development, workforce training, to try and make sure we have opportunities for all of our citizens to partake in the economy. And so then, I had the good fortune of going to Congress and working on those issues. And then President Clinton had tapped me to be in charge of the Midwest for the Small Business Administration. And both my parents are entrepreneurs, and I really have a zeal for trying to help small businesses because that's where the job creation is. It comes from small business. 2/3 of all the new jobs come from small businesses. So then from there, I went back into the private sector. I had a good opportunity to head an employment and training outfit out of just across the border in Lake County, Illinois. And then I was tapped by a company I eventually bought, which we did long-term development projects around the world. We worked on things like occupational safety and health, workforce training, IT projects, auditing and evaluation, things of that sort, which I got to travel the world, which I loved. And then through a weird confluence of events, my seat opened up in the legislature again, and there were actually less than 24 hours left. I had 15 people in my dining room saying, "You got to run to come back." And here I am,
You came
10
back.
years later, I came back, and during one of the wildest periods in state history, of
Yeah.
course, with Act 10
Act
and
10.
all various changes. And but I'm very pleased to be in the governor's administration now. Being Secretary of Revenue, we work with state and local finance, work with all our local officials and communities and county level, and we of course run what we believe will be a very effective, efficient way to collect taxes. We have what I call the entertainment division. We have lottery,
Right,
and,
right.
and then we alcohol and tobacco enforcement. So it's a big responsibility, and it's something I believe strongly in. It's something where hopefully we can help to help the state to prosper and grow. And of course, the governor, one of the hallmarks when he ran was to give 10% credit to anybody making under 100 grand a year, or couples about 150. And that's most citizens.
Yeah.
And small businesses, most small businesses, they struggle those first few years. So this
Correct.
should be a big help to have that kind of credit. And so I'm very enthused about that as well. And so it's a good opportunity. I'm very pleased to be there and be able to work closely.
Yep.
When I was in the Clinton administration, they invited me to go address the new members of Congress. And my
Okay.
theme was, I see life from both sides now, from the legislative and executive branch. So hopefully we'll maintain those positive relationships with people like yourself and try and make progress.
Well, one of the things I've always admired and enjoyed about you, and I think it speaks for the process, your confirmation hearings, where you've gotten a good reputation for working in a bipartisan fashion. You've always been a fair individual. Even when you and I disagreed on things, you've always wanted to sit down and go, "Hey, Jason, talk to me about why you feel this way." You always listen. And I enjoy that. And I think that's the kind, and kudos to Governor Evers for tapping you as somebody who has that kind of reputation with Democrats and Republicans. And so I want to talk to you a little bit before we get into the governor's budget. One of the things that I think a lot of times we either don't understand, and maybe because of a lack of business, when we see articles, and I said we were going to talk about Foxconn because you were heavily involved. It's in your area. You talk with these guys consistently, even now. And so some of the things one of the articles that we see is that, the state has just given this money to these guys. And it's as if the state of Wisconsin just forked over $1 billion and that's it. That's not true, is it, Peter?
No, not at all. And of course, as you know, I represent the Kenosha-Racine area, greater Kenosha-Racine area, including Mount Pleasant, where this is located. And so obviously for me, I could see the benefits for southeastern Wisconsin.
Okay.
From Milwaukee, Kenosha, Racine, obviously will endure the greatest benefits, even Walworth County to some degree. But it was structured in such a way, and the term that was used is pay as you grow, meaning that if you don't create any jobs, you don't get any benefit from
money.
the taxpayers at
Right.
all. In fact, this year they did create some jobs, and they've got a major infrastructure development underway. They've already built one building, but they still didn't get any taxpayer money because they didn't create enough jobs. There's targeted goals that are put forward, and they've got to meet those targets each year in order to get any benefit from the taxpayers. And I know many people do get confused. They think, well, if you've got $1 billion, $2 billion, $3 billion sitting there, why not spend it on something? Well, there isn't that money. That you generate that money
Right.
through creating new jobs and people working that pay income taxes and increase sales taxes because of having opportunities to work in a plan of this sort. And obviously, the thing that really motivated me a great deal were all the academics from,
Yep.
I see you wearing that Marquette hat, the
Yep.
president of Marquette, President Lovell, very articulate, talking about how Pittsburgh got transformed when Google moved there, of course, Chancellor of Parkside, the Gateway Technical College president, Ray Cross, head of the UW system, talked about potentially the enormous cataclysmic changes could make. And but people do need to understand that without them creating jobs, that we can put our people who will have the leg up by virtue of having these workforce training programs, without creating these jobs, they won't get a nickel of taxpayer funds, and so far they haven't, ironically.
And I want to make sure that people understand that. And this is not just the state has just forked over billions of dollars. This is predicated upon some measurements and barometers that they have to reach. Yes, they've spent, and you and I you showed me some of the groundwork down there. These guys are putting in billions of dollars already, or millions of dollars, in the infrastructure. They bought a building in Milwaukee, and even with that, the state hasn't just forked over money to these guys.
Right.
I want to just talk about, or quickly address, some of the myths about the water environment. You and I were talking before, and you were telling me how that actually in that area they're using less water than they used a prior time before that.
Right. It's interesting because I know that there was concern about the quantity of water, how much water they might take out of Lake Michigan. Even if they go to the height of the highest expectations, create 13,000 jobs, build a plant 11 times the size of Lambeau Field where the Packers play, they still will use less water than was used about a decade or so ago in Racine when we were at the height of industrial greatness with Jacobson Corporation, Textron, GI Case when they're still there, Case New Holland, but not nearly as large as they used to be, and many other companies that used to use a ton of water when Racine was sort of like the small engine capital of the world. So ironically, water quantity is not an issue whatsoever. And there's been some misimpressions about that. People are surprised to learn that, but it's absolutely the case.
Peter, I want to talk about, and again, we'll spend a few more minutes because I want to make sure we give some attention to Governor Evers' budget, which I think people will really like to see a lot of the things that are in there. As we discussed Foxconn, why did you, again, no, it's in your area. I voted for it and I supported it because I thought it was a good deal. Well, I was a little hesitant about the deal, but then when I looked at the future benefits, and one of the things you mentioned was the university presidents, and I've talked to Ray Cross, MATC, and all the university presidents are happy about this thing. They're designing classrooms and coursework for future students to come and get employment at places like Foxconn and places outside of Foxconn. Why did you look at this and go, you know what? Yeah, we're going to do this.
Very outspoken, and he won his mayorship. Talking about the prospects of the benefits of Foxconn. But the other side of the equation too was the academics and talking about the technology, but also what it's going to do for our area. I mean, that whole corridor potentially could explode. And the other thing is they attested to the legislature, as you recall, when you talk about small business, which is near and dear to my heart, that they would do $5.2 billion in contracts for businesses in Wisconsin. And 25% would be going to Wisconsin companies, which is $1.4 billion a year. Now, one of the most recent reports that really made me smile is they have exceeded the expectations that were created for minority unemployment for subcontractors, both for the business side and the number of employees. Very exciting to see that kind of commitment on their part, because there were no goals put in the contract itself. Now, of course, they indicated they'd be sensitive to it, and they have been. A couple other areas where they've exceeded the expectations. The $100 million they gave to the UW system, that wasn't required. But they felt there would be a benefit to get the engineering kind of programs. The $250 million fund and the partnership they established with Johnson Controls, Aurora Advocate Healthcare, Northwestern Mutual, all iconic Wisconsin businesses that they put together a venture fund. And so those are things we didn't expect. They created, as you said, the headquarters in Milwaukee. They don't get a nickel for that. Not one single penny.
They bought the building in downtown Milwaukee. And what you'll see is articles saying, well, it's not full That was never part of the deal, if I'm correct. To
Right.
buy a building in downtown Milwaukee was never part of the deal.
No, they didn't have to have a headquarters here. They didn't have to. They don't have to put anybody in there, but they already are remodeling to have their executives in that building, and also they, you know, in Racine, Wisconsin, which, you know, we also have a big problem in terms of, you know, just the disparity, you know, in the minority versus community. And they're building a smart cities building. Well, they bought a building there to put in the smart cities initiative, which will benefit Racine, Milwaukee, Kenosha, and many other cities throughout the state. So these are things over and above anything they were required to do, anything they even had mentioned they might do. And and the other part that's so significant about that is it shows you're planning routes. When you develop partnerships with these companies in Wisconsin, donate $100 million for UW, you know, buy buildings for smart cities in Racine, headquarters in Milwaukee, even Green Bay, Eau Claire. I mean, that shows you have a real interest. And so I now, as Secretary of Revenue, myself and the Secretary of DOA, Secretary of Commerce, or WDC, we have weekly conference calls with the head personnel with Foxconn to make sure we're staying on track. And you know, I can only say that they, you know, have continued to reinforce the commitment that they have here. But the bottom line, underscoring it all, is what you said earlier, and that's the idea that if they don't create the jobs, they will not get any taxpayer resources.
And given the fact that you're now the secretary, the head guy for the Department of Revenue, I would prefer to take it from the horse's mouth who's in charge of this. You know, there's a saying, everybody, that if you don't read the newspaper, you're uninformed. And when you do read the newspaper, you're misinformed. And so what I always like to do, and I'm glad the secretary has come here, a lot of times you need to hear from people who are on the ground doing this, because many times you hear the rhetoric and you hear the talking points, and you don't get the full story of what's really real. In this day and age, we have, between social media and, quite honestly, I think a hit on journalism, where people are not reporting good stories. They're just reporting things that cause attention, cause drama, and it's usually a one-sided kind of presentation. And so thank you for coming, Peter, and talking about that, since you're on the ground and you deal with this. Let's talk about Governor Evers' budget, Peter. That budget had we could literally spend 2 to 3 days on all the items that he put in this budget, and some items just blew me away. I want to hear from you some standout items from you, and then I'll talk to you about some of mine. But when you saw it, what did you had to go, wow?
Well, one, I would say that the governor, you know, who was former superintendent of schools, was always elected, you know, on a nonpartisan basis. And as he said, you know, this isn't a Democrat budget, it's a Republican budget. People don't want divided government. They want us to work together to get things done. And he, at every turn, he's tried to reach out to Republicans. But the key thing is he fulfilled his campaign promises. He told us that education would be the hallmark of his administration. He's invested $1.4 billion. Things that are vital, I think, are trying to get 2/3 funding of education. So it's not so much a burden on property taxpayers. Also, special education, which is very vitally important. We have not kept up with our commitment in special education. He wants to go from, you know, only 24% funding up to 60% funding, which will not only help families who have children with special needs, but also help property taxpayers. It's very expensive for these programs, but we have an ethical, moral commitment to take care of all of God's children.
Right.
And secondly, though, health care. You know, he corrected, if the Republicans, you can convince the Republicans to go along with it, what I have always decried as the worst mistake in a generation, which was not to take the Medicaid money offered by the federal government. Every state around us, Democratic and Republican governors, and mainly Republican governors, they took the money, because why should our citizens have to pony up when we pay money in federal taxes? Why not use that money? It not only is good for the taxpayers, which will bring in about $300 million over a biennium, but it's good for people who desperately need health care. I can't imagine, you know, people who just have serious problems health-wise that can't get care. And we all end up paying for it anyway, because they end up in the emergency room, which is the most expensive, inefficient way to deliver care So why not cover them?
I think it was a mistake that we
Vital.
didn't take that money.
Vital. I think it was one of the things that I think people looked at and thought, well, this isn't Wisconsin values. And then finally, transportation. We have one of the either second or fourth worst roads in the nation, depending on how you look at it. And of course, I know you've always been a champion for trying to have transit as well to get people to work and jobs. And he's made a major investment in transportation. And a lot of that money, people may not know, but the Secretary of Transportation, Secretary Craig Thompson, announced just 2 weeks ago, most of that, or the lion's share maybe, or a huge share, maybe the best way to put it, is going to come back to fix potholes in the counties and the cities.
Peter, that you
everybody
have
knows
no
they
idea
need.
how much good news that is towards my listening audience. I was driving down 60th Street and part of my district, and I'm going, this is insane. You need a Hummer to drive down the street some days. And so
amazing.
it is. I was impressed to hear it. I said, wow. Now I had some concerns because it felt like it was almost too perfect. It was too perfect of a budget.
Right.
It's going to be a battle.
It is. Unfortunately, coming from a federal level, and unfortunately, there's been just way too much polarization.
Yeah.
Now, the governor at every turn said, let's work together. Let's not make this a Democratic budget. Let's make it a Wisconsin budget. And I know he's the kind of person that will sit down with the Republicans, try and find common ground, and so hopefully we can get there. I mean, that's the goal. If we could, as I told, co-chairman Nygren and co-chairwoman, Alberta Darling, who I know very well,
You
and get
work
along
with both
well
of
with
them.
them.
You work well with them.
Let's try and hit the middle on these issues. It doesn't have to be all one way or the other. I mean, I think the public would welcome that.
Right.
And there's so many areas where we could find common ground. We got to start with transportation, which certainly has never been Democrat Republican, but education, vitally. I mean, that's our future.
Yeah.
And everywhere I travel in the state, what businesses tell you is workforce development is the key. So it's not only just having training programs for people to get jobs, but workforce development starts in middle school.
Right.
And we need to make sure we have that focus. So I'm hoping we can get there. That's going to be the challenge the next 4 or 5 months, is to try to find a pathway to bring together values and try and make this a Wisconsin budget we can all be proud of.
And I'll give credit to Governor Evers and to Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes, who I see at the gym working out. Mandela like crazy in shape. Good for him. And I was ecstatic, Secretary, that these guys are really promoting and pushing equity and inclusion, things that I'm very careful and that I'm very adamant about. And I'll give them credit. They have been talking. How do we make sure that the state of Wisconsin is equitable when it comes to our minority population? And was there anything in a budget where when you saw it, you said, you know what, this is really, really good? I mean, were you surprised? I mean, were there moments where you were like, wow, even I didn't think of this?
Well, I'll tell you what, I was surprised a little bit. A couple things that, just highlight even democracy. I mean, the idea that people would be registered to vote automatically. I mean, that, why should anybody be excluded? I mean, it's just vitally important. Going back to the civil rights movement, that was one of the key things that, the great Martin Luther King, Reverend Martin Luther King pushed. And, redistricting reform. I mean, ironically, if there was ever a time Republicans should support this, it's now, because he can veto their plan.
Right.
So they can be certain they're not going to control everything this time. And, you never know, they could control nothing. I mean, you could have a big swing in the election in 2 years. So ironically, this is a time when we should all come together and say, let's have nonpartisan redistricting. So things like that, he didn't make that the centerpiece of his campaign. It were the things we already talked about, which are critically important. But that's another thing that's just so vital. And even you look at urban areas, 2%, increases in shared revenue. Well, that's for our police and fire. I mean, that, to keep our streets safe and our property safe when you have fires, you got to make sure that you have the resources available. And that only comes when the state is a partner with local government. And of course, as partner revenue, it's part of what we do, state and local finance. So I was thrilled to see that.
Right. I am looking at, and we're going to have you back, because I would love to talk about, Peter, the environment of when did it become or start to get so bad the partisanship. And because there were a time when you were coming up, it was a different when you were doing it. It's
Right.
changed a little bit. It's a little
Dramatically.
bit more. It's more. It's more. I don't want to say violent, but it's very partisan. It's very crude and rude, and this spirit of working together seems to be slowly dissipating over the years.
It does, yes. It's so unfortunate, and I think I think back to, like you mentioned, my first tenure in the legislature. We had democratically controlled legislature and a Republican governor for most of my tenure, Tommy Thompson, and we found a way to put aside our difference, because that's Wisconsin. You roll up your sleeves, you get the job done. I'll never forget your speech on Foxconn where you talked about that. I'm here to accomplish things for the people I represent. Well, what is more important than that? And so we've got a governor now, in Governor Evers, that is not a hardcore partisan. I mean, as I indicated, he was elected on a nonpartisan basis. He genuinely wants to try and fix the issues that confront our state. And so I'm hoping that they'll take him at that, and that the Republicans and Democrats, and I'll certainly do my part in the administration. I continue to reach out to Republicans, because we've got to find a pathway to get away from the polarization, and to work together and say, as all God's children, that's what they want us to do.
Well, we're going to leave it there, and I want to thank my dear friend, the Secretary of the Department of Revenue, former Congressman, former Minority Leader. We always mess around, the great Peter Barca. Love you, man. Love you dearly. Thank you for being on the show.
Well, thank you, my friend. It's great to be with you again. Thanks for all the good work you do, and it's so vital to keep our listeners and the citizens and people of this state aware of what's going on.
Thank you. You guys have been listening to The Financial Promise, 30 Minutes of Power with Jason Fields. See you next week.
Yeah, thank you, Jacob.
Good show, man.
Good, yeah, thanks.
Good show.
Like you said, it went fast.
I know, man. Like, we can
I
literally...
only had 17 more minutes to cover.
Like, we literally could... Like, at some point, I'm going to think about an hour, because there's so much that I would have loved to just talk to you and got
I know.
And just, it's so much. But it was a good show, man. I'm glad that we got a chance to talk about some of the things that I think people don't really get to see and hear from. Particularly when, because we're always in Madison, and so I think there are a lot of times where our listening audience needs to hear from people like yourself, people who are on the ground, people who have, business experience. What I found is that you get a lot of people commenting in on business, and it's no offense, but they've never done business.
Yeah, they have no idea.
They have no idea, and so until you can educate them, this is how it goes. And this concept that we just giving money away, like that's not how this works. So thank you for being here, man.
Yeah,
I really appreciate
thank you.
it.
Awesome.
Jacob, thank you, man. And we'll get the CD for you. I'll make sure you get it next week.
Yep.